The early 1900s were a time of change. America was growing fast, towns were small and quiet, people felt safe in their homes, but then something terrible started happening. A shadow fell over these calm places. It was a time when fear started traveling by train. Imagine living in a small town, maybe in Iowa or Kansas. Everyone knew everyone. Doors were left unlocked, children played outside until dark. Life was simple, but this feeling of safety was about to be shattered. It started slowly. A brutal killing here, another there. At first, no one thought they were connected by just terrible local tragedies. But then more killings happened, and people started to notice patterns. A dark thread weaving through the heartland. The first big shot came in 1912, the town of Villisca, Iowa. A small, peaceful farming community. Everyone knew the Moore family. Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, their 4 children. And 2 young girls, Lena and Ina Stillinger, who were staying overnight. 8 people in one house, all dead, killed in their sleep. The horror of Villisca was immense. It wasn't just a murder. It was an extermination. The killer used an axe. He covered the faces of the victims with bed sheets. He left a strange scene. Food in the kitchen, curtains drawn, locked doors. It was like a ritual. And he vanished without a trace. This wasn't the first time such a thing had happened. People didn't know it yet, but this kind of crime had been happening for years. It started as early as 1898. In cities and towns across the Midwest, then moving west. A family found dead, all killed by an axe or a blunt weapon. Always at night, always in their homes. These crimes were terrifying, they were random. They didn't seem to have a clear motive. Sometimes money was taken, but not always. Sometimes there was sexual assault, but not always. The main goal seemed to be the killing itself. The complete destruction of a family. And it wasn't just Villisca. Before that, there was the Van Gilder family in Powell, Kansas in 1911. 5 people killed. The Showman family in Colorado Springs, Colorado in 1911. 4 people. The Dawson family in Russellville, Kentucky in 1911. 6 people. The terrifying list grew. These killings were different from other crimes. They weren't robberies gone wrong. They weren't typical revenge killings. They felt more cold, more planned. The killer was efficient. He entered the home, did his work, and left. He left behind few clues. Only shattered lives and widespread fear. People started to lock their doors at night. They bought guns. They looked at strangers with suspicion. Panic started to spread, especially in the small towns where these horrors occurred. They couldn't understand who would do such a thing and why. The sheer brutality was shocking. Children were often among the victims. Sometimes babies. No one was spared. This made the crimes even more horrifying. It stripped away all sense of innocence and safety. It made people realize that evil could visit anyone, anywhere. Even in the most ordinary of places. The killer was quiet. He was unseen. He was like a ghost moving through the night, leaving death in his wake, and then disappearing into the darkness. But how did he travel so far? How did he move from town to town, leaving a trail of blood? The answer, many believed, lay in the very thing that was connecting America, the train. The early 1900s were the golden age of train travel. Railroads crisscrossed the country. They connected every small town. They were the fastest, easiest way to move around. For regular people, for goods, and for a killer. This is where the idea of the man from the train started to take hold. Researchers later looked at these many unsolved murders, dozens of them. They saw a clear pattern. The towns where the killings happened were often right on a main rail line. Think about it. With a killer could get on a train in one town, travel a few hours or even a day to another town, get off the train, do his terrible work under the cover of night, and then get back on a train. He could be hundreds of miles away by morning. No one would notice a stranger passing through. Trains carried all sorts of people. Vagrants, salesmen, drifters. They were anonymous. The killer seemed to favor towns that were easy to get into and out of by train. He didn't stay long, he wasn't local, he was a transient. A phantom who arrived and departed with the roar of the locomotive. The MO, or modus operandi, of these killings was strikingly similar, always at night. Usually a family at home, the weapon was almost always an axe, or a heavy blunt object. Sometimes the home's own axe, found in a shed or woodshed, was used. The victims were attacked in their beds, often in their sleep. The killer would cover the faces of the victims, often with a sheet or blanket. Sometimes the curtains were drawn, doors locked from the inside. The killer would often stay in the house for some time after the murders, eating food, leaving behind strange clues like a kerosene lamp left burning, or the axe still in the house. This consistent pattern pointed to one person. It was too specific to be many different killers. It suggested a disturbed mind, following a grim routine, a person obsessed with these particular acts of violence. The geographical spread was wide, from Kentucky to Colorado, from Missouri to Washington state. These weren't local feuds, these were attacks by someone who could travel vast distances. Someone who saw the entire rail network as his hunting ground. The sheer number of victims was staggering. Over a period of about 14 years, from 1898 to 1912, researchers linked over 24 separate incidents. These incidents involved well over 100 victims, entire families wiped out, whole generations cut short. The scale of the horror was immense, and it was all tied together by the same chilling signature. The victims themselves were often middle-class or working-class families. No particular type of family seemed to be targeted. Just families, just people living their quiet lives. This made the attacks even more random. It meant anyone could be next. The killer would approach the house in the dead of night. He would often enter through an unlocked door or window. He knew what he was doing. He was skilled at moving silently. He knew how to surprise his victims, and he knew how to leave without being seen. His movements seemed almost methodical. He would strike in one town, then disappear, only to reappear months later, or even a year later, in a completely different state, to strike again. It was a terrifying game of hide-and-seek, played across the vast American landscape. With ordinary families as his prey, the train was his secret weapon. It allowed him to be everywhere and nowhere. It allowed him to spread terror without leaving a direct trail. It allowed him to remain anonymous, a faceless menace who rode the rails, a man from the train. Let's look closer at how these terrible acts happened. The man from the train wasn't just a killer, he was a predator. He planned his attacks. He entered homes with a specific purpose, and he left behind a very particular kind of chaos. He worked in the dark, literally. He often struck when the moon was new, or during a storm. Anything to help him stay unseen. He was very good at it. Neighbors rarely saw anything. Dogs didn't bark. He was like a ghost. Once inside the home, he moved silently. He would go to the bedrooms. He would select his weapon, usually an axe he found on the property, sometimes a hammer or another blunt tool. He used what was at hand. He made the home itself a part of the crime. Then came the attack. Swift and brutal. He would kill everyone in the house. Adults, children, babies. No one was spared. The blows were often delivered to the head. They were meant to be lethal. And they were. After the killings, things would get strange. The killer didn't always leave right away. Sometimes he stayed for hours. He would cover the faces of the dead with sheets, blankets, or coats. This was a consistent detail. It was almost like he didn't want to see their faces. Or he wanted to make them look peaceful. Or perhaps it was a ritual of some kind. He would sometimes eat food in the kitchen, leaving dirty dishes. He would sometimes leave a kerosene lamp burning, placed strategically, perhaps to buy himself time, to ensure the fire would start later. Or maybe just another part of his twisted ritual. He would often lock the doors from the inside and draw the curtains, making the house a sealed tomb. This added to the mystery. How did he get out? He must have found a way. Maybe through an unlocked window, or a back door. Or maybe he had a key. But the sealed house added to the eerie, almost supernatural feel of the crimes. Sometimes he would start a fire. Not always. But arson was a part of some of the crimes. This would destroy evidence. It would make it even harder for investigators. It also added another layer of terror. Not just death, but destruction of the home itself. The motive was never clear. If it was robbery, he wasn't very good at it. Sometimes money was left behind. Sometimes a small amount was taken. But it never seemed to be the primary reason for the murders. If it was sexual assault, that wasn't always present either, though it did happen in some cases. Again, it didn't seem to be the main driver. The main motive seemed to be the act of killing itself. The complete annihilation of a family, the ultimate violation of a home. This suggested a deeply disturbed mind. Someone who found a strange satisfaction in these acts. Someone who hated families. Or perhaps just hated life itself. The killer left very few clues, no fingerprints, because fingerprinting was still new and not widely used. And he seemed to avoid leaving them anyway. No clear footprints, no witness descriptions that were useful. He was a master of evasion. He was a professional in a twisted way. He knew how to enter a home without breaking in. He knew how to kill silently, and he knew how to disappear without a trace. He was a ghost in the night, moving from town to town, riding the rails, leaving behind a trail of horror that would haunt the nation for decades. The police were baffled. They had never seen anything like it, and they struggled to catch him. Catching the man from the train was almost impossible for the police of that era. Law enforcement was very different back then. There was no FBI, no national database for crimes. Police forces were local, they didn't communicate well across state lines, they didn't share information easily. Each murder was treated as a local crime, a separate incident. They didn't have the tools we have today. No DNA analysis, no advanced ballistics, fingerprinting was in its infancy, and often crime scenes were not protected. Crowds of curious onlookers would walk through a murder scene, destroying evidence. When a murder happened, the local sheriff or marshal would take charge. They would interview neighbors. They would look for local suspects. But the killer wasn't local. He was a stranger who arrived by train and left by train. This made the investigation incredibly difficult. How do you find a ghost? How do you track someone who leaves no clear trail? Someone who commits a crime and then travels hundreds of miles away. Early suspects were often people who seemed off in some way, or people who had some connection to the victims. For example, in the Veliska case, many people were suspected. A local state senator, Frank Jones, was a prominent suspect. He had business dealings with Josiah Moore, there were rumors of a feud, but no hard evidence ever tied him to the crime. Another suspect in Veliska, and many other cases, was a traveling minister named Reverend George Kelly. He was a strange man. He confessed to the Veliska murders years later, but his confession was full of holes. He seemed to know things only the killer would know, but he also changed his story often. He was eventually tried, but the jury couldn't agree. He was never convicted. And even if he committed Veliska, it's unlikely he committed all the man from the train murders. The authorities were overwhelmed. They chased down countless leads. They interviewed thousands of people. But nothing ever stuck. The killer was always one step ahead, or he simply didn't exist in the way they expected. He was a transient, a shadow. The press covered these crimes extensively. The Axe murders became front-page news. This created widespread fear, but it also put pressure on law enforcement. They were desperate to catch someone. Anyone. Reward money was offered, large sums, but even that didn't help. The killer was too careful, too elusive. He didn't brag, he didn't leave notes, he simply did his work and vanished. The lack of progress led to frustration and finger pointing. Law enforcement was criticized for their failures. Detectives from different states sometimes even worked against each other instead of together. This made the killer's job easier. He exploited the weaknesses of the system. Many people believed the killer must be insane. No sane person could commit such atrocities, but his actions were too controlled. Too methodical. He wasn't a raving lunatic. He was a calculated monster. The killings eventually stopped. Around 1912, no one knows why. Did the killer die? Did he go to prison for a different crime? Did he simply stop? The end of the killing spree was as mysterious as its beginning. But the fear remained. The unsolved cases hung over the towns like a pall. The memory of the man from the train lingered. A haunting question in the American consciousness: who was he, and why was he never caught? These questions would remain unanswered for nearly a century, until new research shed a different light on the terrifying tale. The story of the man from the train remained largely a collection of unconnected mysteries for decades. The individual axe murders were remembered in their local towns, but the idea of a single traveling killer was mostly forgotten. That is, until a father-daughter writing team decided to look into it again. Bill James is a famous baseball writer. His daughter, Rachel McCarthy James, is a writer too. They live in Kansas. They became fascinated by the Veliska axe murders. And as they researched, they started seeing connections that had been missed or ignored by earlier investigators. They went deep into old newspaper archives, old court records, police reports. They uncovered dozens of similar cases. For cases that happened before Veliska, cases that happened after, all with the same chilling details. The axe, the family, the night attack, the covered faces, the train lines. Their research, published in their book The Man from the Train, presented a powerful argument. It wasn't many killers, it was one mysterious individual. He was the man from the train. They built a detailed profile of this elusive killer. He was probably a white man, very likely in his 30s or 40s. He was a loner. He had no job that would tie him down. He could travel freely. He was smart, very smart. He knew how to avoid detection. He understood the railway system. He likely suffered from some deep psychological disturbance. He wasn't after money. He wasn't after sex, primarily. His main goal was to commit these murders. to destroy families, to exert a terrible power over others. He probably hated women and children, as they were often his primary targets. He was meticulous, he didn't act on impulse, he planned his visits to towns, he probably scouted homes beforehand, looking for easy entry, looking for families who wouldn't be missed right away. The Jameses pointed out that the killer's reign of terror stopped around 1912. This was significant. It suggests he either died or was imprisoned for something else. Or perhaps he simply changed his methods and started committing different kinds of crimes. They explored some known historical figures who might fit the profile, but they never definitively named the killer. Because, for all these dozens of murders, his true identity remains a mystery. There was no single arrest, no single conviction for the man from the train as a collective entity. The impact of this killer was profound. He instilled a fear that echoed for generations. He showed that evil could strike anywhere. Even in the safest, most ordinary places, he changed how people thought about home and safety. The enduring mystery of the man from the train is a powerful reminder of how crime was investigated in the past, and how a truly clever and disturbed individual could operate almost freely, for years, killing dozens, and never facing justice. His story is a chilling chapter in American history. A story of fear, of unanswered questions, of the phantom who rode the rails, leaving a trail of blood across the nation. We may never know his true name, but the shadow of the man from the train continues to haunt us. A testament to the darkness that can exist, unseen, in our world, and to the enduring power of a good mystery, even when that mystery is terrifying.